The flashing red and blue lights lit up the quiet suburban street as officers surrounded my car. The HOA president, Karen Whitmore, stood proudly behind them, arms crossed and smirking like she'd just caught a criminal. She had accused me of trespassing on private HOA property. What she didn't know, what would soon turn her smug grin into shock, was that I wasn't just any homeowner. I was Judge Marcus Hale, the same man who had the authority to shut down her entire corrupt HOA board. She had picked the wrong person to humiliate. As the officers demanded my ID, and Karen barked insults about lawbreakers, I calmly handed over my credentials. The moment the chief read my name, his face went pale. This wasn't going to end with me in handcuffs. It was going to end with the HOA standing trial in my courtroom. Asterisk. The morning sunlight filtered gently through the wide oak branches that shaded my new home in Willow Creek Estates. It was one of those rare, quiet neighborhoods you only saw in magazines, the kind with perfectly trimmed hedges, identical mailboxes, and smiles that seemed rehearsed. I'd moved here only 3 weeks ago, hoping for peace after 20 years of serving on the bench. Being a judge had shown me every kind of human conflict imaginable. Family feuds, neighborhood disputes, fraud, you name it. I thought I'd left all that behind when I signed the closing papers on this Toker property by the lake. What I didn't realize was that this neighborhood had its own brand of courtroom drama, led by a woman who saw herself as queen of the call-day-sack. The first week was fine. I unpacked my boxers, planted a few azaleas, and spent quiet evenings reading on the porch. The lake shimmered gold under the sunset, and the sound of frogs at night felt like music after years of city noise. My neighbors seemed polite, if a little stiff. Most waved from a distance, but never stopped to talk. The only one who came over in person was Karen Whitmore, the self-proclaimed president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. She showed up the second morning after I moved in, clipboard in hand, wearing a blazer like she was running for office. "Welcome to Willow Creek," she said, flashing a practiced smile. "We're a tight-knit community here. Judge Hale." "Oh, I'm sorry. Do you mind if I call you Marcus?" "Marcus is fine," I replied. "And thank you. I'm still settling in." Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "I just wanted to go over a few of our community standards. We take pride in keeping things orderly." She handed me a thick booklet, the HOA Rules and Regulations. The thing looked heavier than most law books I'd read. She began explaining the guidelines like a tour guide, how trash bins couldn't be visible from the street, how lawns had to be mowed every 4 days, and how vehicles couldn't be parked in the driveway overnight. I nodded politely, but part of me couldn't help but feel uneasy. It wasn't the rules that bothered me. It was the way she spoke about them. Her tone wasn't friendly. It was controlling, like she enjoyed enforcing power. "I'll be sure to follow the guidelines," I said calmly, even though I hadn't planned on memorizing a booklet of lawn rules. 2 days later, I received my first notice. A small white envelope was taped to my front door. "Violation, trash bin left in view for 14 minutes. Past pickup time." I actually laughed out loud. It had to be a joke, but it wasn't. A $50 fine was printed at the bottom, along with a signature, K. Whitmore, HOA president. I ignored it, thinking it must have been an overzealous mistake. But Karen didn't take kindly to being ignored. The next week, I received 2 more violations, one for having unapproved garden plants, and another because a non-standard vehicle, my truck, was parked outside after sunset. I hadn't even moved in fully, yet she was already trying to make an example of me. That weekend, I decided to take a walk by the lake behind my property. The deed clearly showed that part of the shoreline fell within my lot lines, which meant I had every right to enjoy it. I took my fishing rod, a small cooler, and a folding chair. It was peaceful, just the sound of water and wind brushing the cat. But peace never lasted long where Karen was concerned. An hour into my quiet afternoon, I heard the familiar crunch of heels on gravel. "Excuse me," Karen's voice cut through the air. I turned to see her standing near the water's edge, hands on hips, that same clipboard clutched tightly. "This area is HOA property," she declared. "You're not allowed to fish here without authorization." I looked around, confused. "This is my land," I said evenly. "It's listed in my deed. You're welcome to check." "I don't need to check," she snapped. "The HOA manages all community lakes and access points. You'll receive a violation notice for this." I sighed. "Karen, I think you're overstepping, but go ahead and send whatever notice you want." That response seemed to fuel her fire. Her face reddened, and she stormed off muttering something about troublemakers. I didn't care, not yet. Anyway, I'd dealt with worse egos in courtrooms. But this wasn't just a woman being difficult. This was someone who had built an entire system of control around her and thrived on intimidation. 3 days later, I found a new envelope in my mailbox. This time, it wasn't a fine. It was a warning of legal action for unauthorized use of community resources. I reread the letter twice, hardly believing it. She was threatening to take me to small claims court over fishing in my own backyard. I laughed again, but this time there was no humor in it. It was the kind of laugh that comes when you know something ridiculous has crossed into dangerous territory. That night, I sat on my porch watching the lights ripple over the lake. I'd come here for peace, not a power struggle. But as I watched Karen march around the neighborhood inspecting lawns with a flashlight like a warden on patrol, I realized something. This wasn't going to stop on its own. People like her didn't back down unless they were made to. I didn't plan on using my title or authority. Not yet. But if she kept pushing, she'd find out exactly who she was dealing with. And deep down, I already knew this quiet little neighborhood was about to turn into a courtroom once again. But this time, I wasn't the one on trial. The next morning began with the sharp echo of a knock on my door. When I opened it, a uniformed man stood there, holding a clipboard and wearing a sheepish smile. "Morning, sir. Code enforcement," he said. Behind him, I could see Karen standing on the sidewalk, pretending to water her plants while watching closely. "I'm here because we received a report about an unauthorized structure on your property," he explained, flipping through a few pages. "Structure?" I asked. "You mean the small dock I've had since I moved in?" He nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Apparently, it violates HOA and county guidelines." I could already tell what was happening. Karen had filed a complaint, hoping to use local code enforcement to back her up. I stayed calm, inviting the officer to take a look for himself. The dock was simple for planks, a small platform, nothing extravagant. He took a few photos, clearly realizing this wasn't worth the fuss. "Honestly," he said quietly, "this looks fine to me, but I have to file a report." I thanked him and watched as he left. Karen gave a smug little wave from her driveway, just keeping things fair. "Marcus," she called out, "everyone follows the rules here." I didn't answer. The law had taught me one thing. Silence was often more powerful than argument. But inside, a quiet irritation began to build. This wasn't about community or fairness. This was about power. Karen wasn't protecting order. She was protecting her ego. And now she was dragging the authorities into a personal war. Over the next few days, her harassment became relentless. I got letters accusing me of operating a business from home because a few colleagues had stopped by to visit. I got fined for failure to maintain lawn uniformity because my grass had grown a quarter-inch higher than the neighbors. I even received an email suggesting I remove the American flag from my porch because it disrupted the visual harmony of the community. It was absurd. The final straw came on a Thursday afternoon. I returned from a grocery trip to find 2 police cruisers parked at the edge of my driveway. Karen stood nearby, her arms crossed, smirking triumphantly as if she'd finally won. "Officer," she said loudly, pointing toward me, "that's him. He's been trespassing on HOA property and ignoring repeated warnings." I blinked, setting my groceries down on the porch. "Trespassing? On my own land?" The officers exchanged uncomfortable looks. "Sir, we got a call saying you were repeatedly accessing restricted property behind your house, the lake." I asked. "Yes," one replied. "We were told it belongs entirely to the HOA." I sighed and reached into my briefcase, pulling out the deed and property map I'd brought home after this nonsense began. "Here's the legal documentation," I said, handing it over. "My property line extends 10 feet beyond the shoreline. The HOA does not own this land. You can verify that with the county office." The officer took the papers, scanning them. I could see the shift in his face as realization dawned. "Sir," he said, "these look legitimate." Karen's tone sharpened. "He's lying. He's using fake documents to get away with violations. Arrest him." That was it. Her arrogance, her ignorance, her utter disregard for truth. It all boiled over in that one sentence. I turned to her and said quietly, "Careful, Karen. You're accusing a sitting judge of falsifying legal documents. That's defamation, and it's a crime." For the first time, she faltered. Her eyes widened, but she quickly regained her composure. "You can't be a judge. You live here." One of the officers glanced at me, curious now. "Sir, may I ask your full name?" "Judge Marcus Hale," I replied evenly, showing them my identification. The air seemed to freeze. The officer's face drained of color as he read it. "Oh," he muttered. "Sir, I apologize. We had no idea." Karen's voice broke the silence, shaky now. You're a judge." I nodded slowly. "The same judge who oversees community association disputes for the entire county. You really should have done your research." The officers quickly backed off, apologizing once more before leaving. Karen stood there, trembling, no longer smirking. Her confident stance had crumbled. Without another word, she turned and walked away, her heels clacking against the pavement like fading echoes of defeat. But I knew this wasn't over. Karen wasn't the type to admit she was wrong. She doubled down, tried to twist the story, maybe even convince the HOA board that I was abusing authority. People like her always believed they could win by talking louder, by manipulating fear. But she'd just made a very big mistake. She'd crossed the line between harassment and criminal misconduct that evening. I sat at my desk with a cup of coffee, reading through the HOA's governing documents and financial reports that were publicly available online. It didn't take long to notice the red flags, unapproved budgets, strange maintenance expenses, and missing funds. It was clear. The HOA wasn't just overzealous. It was corrupt. Karen and a few board members had been quietly diverting homeowner fees into consulting costs. Paid to a shell company under Karen's husband's name. By midnight, I had printed everything: emails, budgets, and meeting notes. It wasn't just about defending myself anymore. It was about defending the neighborhood. She had bullied too many people for too long, and now she'd picked the wrong target. As I looked out the window toward the lake, the reflection of the moon shimmered on the water's surface. It was calm now, but I knew that calm wouldn't last. The next move was mine, and this time, it would be on my turf. The courtroom. The days that followed were unusually quiet, but I knew better than to mistake silence for surrender. Karen might have retreated after the police incident, but her kind didn't give up. Control was her lifeblood. She'd find another way to strike back. Still, I wasn't about to wait for her next move. It was time to turn the tables, and this time, I'd do it by the book. That Sunday morning, I brewed a strong pot of coffee, laid out every HOA document I had printed, and began taking notes. Years of courtroom experience had sharpened my instincts. I could smell manipulation in these papers from a mile away. The maintenance fees section was bloated with vague terms like beautification, project, and consultant review expense. The numbers didn't add up. Every year, the HOA collected over $200,000 in homeowner dues, but only a fraction seemed to go toward actual maintenance. Where was the rest going? A closer look revealed that many of the invoices were billed to a company called Whitmore Property Solutions. The name immediately caught my attention. Whitmore, Karen's last name. I ran the company through the state's business registry and, sure enough, it was owned by her husband, Mark Whitmore. That was the first domino to fall. I made a few calls to old contacts in the county records office and asked for public expenditure data connected to the HOA. Within an hour, I had access to property tax filings and inspection permits. The deeper I looked, the clearer the picture became. Karen had been running the HOA like a personal ATM, funneling community funds through her husband's fake maintenance company, and padding the invoices with non-existent projects, pressure washing sidewalks that were never cleaned, repainting gates that had never been touched, even landscaping upgrades for non-existent gardens. But what truly disturbed me was a line item for legal consultation fees. Over $25,000 paid out in a single year, all under the table. I called a friend of mine at the county attorney's office and asked him to discreetly look into it. A few hours later, he called back with a laugh that said it all. "Marcus, you won't believe this. The lawyer listed on these invoices, he doesn't exist. It's a fake name. No license, no bar record, nothing." That was enough evidence to launch a formal inquiry. Still, I needed to be careful. As much as I wanted to expose her immediately, I couldn't act recklessly. Judges live by one rule: procedure first, emotion second. So I drafted a letter requesting a full financial audit of the Willow Creek HOA, citing irregularities under state homeowner association law. I signed it as a resident, not a judge. If Karen wanted to play her little power game, I'd make sure she lost fair and square. In full public view, the audit request had to go through the county's Civil Oversight Committee, which meant it would take a few days to process. During that time, I kept a low profile, but Karen must have sensed something. One evening, as I was leaving to get mail, I noticed her standing at the end of my driveway, pretending to chat with a neighbor, but clearly watching me. Her expression wasn't smug anymore. It was wary. She must have heard something. A few nights later, I got my answer. Around midnight, headlights flashed through my living room window. I stepped outside and saw a pickup truck parked across the street. Two men were inside, engine idling. They weren't neighbors. I watched them for a moment before they drove off slowly. Subtle intimidation, Karen's latest tactic. I took note of the license plate and wrote it down. By the end of the week, the county officially approved my audit request. They scheduled an on-site inspection for the following Monday. I knew Karen would be furious. Sure enough, the next morning, my phone buzzed with an email from her. "Mr. Hale, the HOA board has received your baseless and defamatory request for an audit. This is harassment, and we will not tolerate it. You will be fined for making false claims against the association." I smiled. She had no idea what was coming. I didn't reply. The audit would speak for itself. On Monday, 2 county auditors arrived, one of whom happened to be an old colleague from my courthouse days. We met in my driveway before walking to the HOA office together. Karen was waiting, arms folded, jaw clenched. "This is unnecessary," she said stiffly. "All our books are in perfect order." The lead auditor, a woman named Diane, simply replied, "Then you have nothing to worry about." They spent 4 hours going through receipts, bank statements, and invoices. Karen tried to hover over their shoulders, offering explanations for every questionable entry, but Diane politely asked her to step aside. By the time they left, Karen's confidence had completely cracked. She didn't even make eye contact as they packed up their files. 2 days later, I received a call from Diane. "Marcus," she said, "we found enough evidence of embezzlement and fraudulent accounting to justify a full investigation. We're forwarding it to the county prosecutor." That was the moment I knew the tide had turned. That evening, I stood by the lake as the sun sank behind the trees. The air felt heavier, not from worry, but from anticipation. Karen had pushed this neighborhood around for years, but now the law was coming for her. I could almost hear the faint echoes of justice rolling in like distant thunder. When I turned to head inside, I noticed Karen's car parked across the street again. She sat in the driver's seat, staring at my house. Her expression wasn't angry anymore, it was afraid. She knew something had shifted, and for the first time, I saw the truth in her eyes. The Queen of Willow Creek was finally realizing her reign was over. The storm broke a week later, not the kind that rumbled through the sky, but the kind that tore through reputations and left people scrambling for cover. Word of the audit had spread across Willow Creek Estates like wildfire. By Monday morning, every neighbor on the street knew the HOA was under official investigation for fraud. Karen's perfect world, the one she ruled with fines and threats, was cracking right down the middle. When I stepped outside to get my paper, I could feel the tension in the air. Neighbors who used to wave politely now whispered in groups at the corners, exchanging knowing looks. Someone had even taken down the proud member of the Willow Creek HOA sign from the front gate. For once, I didn't feel like the outsider. People who had once feared Karen's wrath were finally seeing her for what she was, a bully in pearls. That afternoon, the county investigators returned, this time with law enforcement in tow. I watched from my porch as two unmarked cars pulled up in front of the HOA office, which doubled as a small building near the community pool. Karen was already there, pacing nervously by the door with a folder clutched in her hands. When she saw the officers step out, her face went pale. "Is this really necessary?" she demanded. "This is a misunderstanding. I've already spoken to my attorney." The lead investigator, Diane, remained calm. "We're here to collect documents as part of the county's audit expansion. Please cooperate." Karen's voice trembled as she tried to sound in control. "You people are making a mistake. I've done nothing wrong." But she wasn't convincing anyone anymore. The officers entered the office, escorted by the HOA treasurer, a nervous man named Robert who looked like he hadn't slept in days. He avoided Karen's eyes completely. Minutes later, they began carrying out boxes of files and computers. The whole neighborhood watched in stunned silence. Karen's composure shattered when she saw them loading evidence into the cars. "You can't take those. Those are private records," she screamed, trying to grab one of the boxers. An officer gently stepped between them. "Ma'am, please step back." It was over. Everyone knew it. That evening, the HOA chat group, usually filled with messages about lost cats and lawn schedules, exploded with outrage. Dozens of residents accused the board of theft, fraud, and abuse of power. Some posted screenshots of Karen's threatening emails and inflated fines. It was chaos. By the next morning, over half the community had signed a petition to dissolve the HOA entirely. Still, Karen wasn't ready to give up. Desperation can make even the proudest people reckless. The very next day, she showed up at my doorstep, eyes red, face tight with anger and fear. "You did this," she hissed. "You think you can destroy me? I built this community." I met her gaze calmly. "No, Karen, you built a system of control. I just showed everyone the truth." Her voice cracked as she tried to regain her authority. "You don't understand. I only did what was necessary to keep things in order. People need leadership. They need someone to make the hard choices. Leadership isn't control," I said quietly, "and rules mean nothing if the people enforcing them are corrupt." She glared at me for a long moment before storming off, muttering something about getting her lawyers involved. But I could tell she wasn't walking away from this unscathed. She was spiraling. 2 days later, the county prosecutor's office formally charged Karen and her husband with embezzlement, document falsification, and misuse of public funds. It hit the local news by evening. HOA president accused of embezzling community funds, the headline read. Their photos were plastered across the screen, and the story spread far beyond our little neighborhood. The mighty Karen Whitmore, who once bragged about keeping Willow Creek, the best-run community in the county, was now the face of greed and corruption. The neighborhood changed almost overnight. Without Karen's constant surveillance, people started to relax. Kids rode their bikes again without being scolded for sidewalk safety violations. Neighbors began talking freely, laughing, even hosting small gatherings by the lake. The fear that once hung over the place had lifted like fog after rain. A few residents came to my door over the next few days to thank me. One older man, Mr. Keller, told me quietly, "You did what we all wanted to do for years, but didn't dare. That woman ruined lives. Thank you for standing up to her." But I hadn't done it for thanks. I'd done it because corruption, no matter how small, always spreads if left unchecked. Whether it's in a courtroom, a government office, or a neighborhood board, the same truth applies. Unchecked power rots everything it touches. A week later, I was called to testify as a witness during the preliminary hearing. Standing in that courtroom, watching Karen and her husband sit across the aisle, was surreal. I'd presided over hundreds of cases in my career, but this one felt different. This wasn't about strangers, it was about justice right where I lived. When the prosecutor presented the evidence I'd helped uncover, Karen couldn't even look up. Her arrogance was gone, replaced by shame and disbelief. After the hearing, as I stepped outside, a reporter approached me. "Judge Hale," she asked, How does it feel knowing you helped bring down one of the most powerful HOA presidents in the county? I paused, glancing back toward the courthouse. It's not about power, I said. It's about fairness. People like her forget that leadership is supposed to serve, not control. Eventually, the law reminds them. That evening, back home by the lake, I stood on my rebuilt dock, the same one Karen once called unauthorized. The water was calm, reflecting the fading orange glow of sunset. For the first time since I moved to Willow Creek, the neighborhood was truly peaceful. As I cast my fishing line into the water, I thought about everything that had happened, the warnings, the false reports, the police, the investigation, the downfall. It had all started with one woman's obsession with control and ended with justice. Restoring balance. And, as the ripples spread across the lake, I smiled to myself, thinking how fitting it was. In the end, peace doesn't come from power, it comes from truth. The courthouse buzzed with quiet tension that morning. Every seat in the gallery was filled. Neighbors from Willow Creek, local reporters, even a few county officials who wanted to see how it would all end. For months, the story of the HOA queen gone rogue had dominated small-town headlines, and today would be the final chapter. Karen Whitmore and her husband Mark sat side by side at the defendant's table, looking like shadows of their former selves. Gone were the designer suits and polished smiles. Now, they looked worn, tired, and defeated. I sat quietly in the back row, no longer involved in the case, but there to witness justice play out. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same woman who had once tried to have me arrested for trespassing was now facing real charges for crimes that hurt an entire community. She had tried to control every blade of grass and every mailbox in Willow Creek, and now, she couldn't even control her own fate. The prosecutor began his closing statement, laying out the facts one final time. The defendants used their positions of trust within the Willow Creek Homeowners Association to siphon tens of thousands of dollars from their neighbors, people who believed in them, who trusted them to manage their community honestly. Instead, they created fake contracts, pocketed funds, and punished anyone who dared question them. Justice must be served. The defense tried to paint Karen as misunderstood, a woman overwhelmed by responsibility, not greed. But it was hard to believe. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, false invoices, and the testimony of frightened residents who'd been bullied into silence. Even her husband looked resigned, as if he knew there was no way out. When the judge finally began reading the verdict, the room went still. Karen's hands trembled as the words echoed through the courtroom. Guilty on all counts: embezzlement, fraud, and misuse of community funds. Her husband received the same fate. The judge's tone was firm but not cruel. This community placed its faith in you, he said. You used that trust as a weapon. The law cannot overlook such betrayal. Karen closed her eyes as the sentence was read: 2 years in county jail and restitution for every stolen dollar. There were no screams, no protests, just a long, heavy silence. For the first time since I'd met her, she had nothing left to say. After the hearing, I stepped outside into the crisp morning air. The crowd followed, buzzing with emotion, some angry, some relieved, but most simply grateful. A few neighbors approached me, shaking my hand, thanking me again for standing up to her when no one else dared. I didn't feel like a hero. I just felt settled. Justice had taken its course, and peace was finally within reach. Back in Willow Creek, the atmosphere had completely changed. The HOA was officially dissolved after the state took over its accounts, and a temporary neighborhood committee was formed to manage basic maintenance until a fairer system could be created. The transformation was remarkable. People started greeting each other again, hosting barbecues, helping fix fences together. The sense of community that Karen claimed to protect was finally real, built not on fear but on friendship. I spent more time at the lake than ever before. It had always been my place of calm, but now it felt symbolic, a quiet reminder of everything that had happened. The water shimmered gently under the afternoon sun, reflecting peace instead of tension. Sometimes, when I saw kids fishing or families picnicking nearby, I couldn't help but smile. That lake, once the center of Karen's false authority, had become the heart of the neighborhood again. One afternoon, as I packed up my fishing gear, I heard footsteps behind me. It was Robert, the former HOA treasurer. He looked nervous at first, then managed a small smile. I wanted to apologize, he said. I knew some of what was going on, but didn't have the courage to speak up. You did. You saved us all from her. I nodded. It's never easy to stand up to people like that. Robert, fear can silence good people, but truth always finds its voice. He smiled faintly. Still, you reminded us what justice looks like. After he left, I sat for a while longer, watching the ripples on the water fade into stillness. The sound of birds overhead and the gentle rustle of leaves brought a peace I hadn't felt in years. This wasn't just the end of a feud, it was the rebirth of a community. A month later, I received a formal letter from the county's housing committee. They wanted me to consult on new HOA oversight policies to prevent abuse of power in residential associations. I couldn't help but chuckle as I read it. Life has a strange sense of humor. I had retired to escape paperwork and disputes, yet here I was back in the heart of reform. But this time, It felt right. Maybe it was my purpose after all, to make sure what happened in Willow Creek would never happen anywhere else. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long golden streaks across the lake, I felt a deep sense of closure. The neighborhood was healing. Justice had been done. And as for Karen, somewhere out there, she had plenty of time to think about the power she'd abused and the peace she'd destroyed. I hoped that, in her own way, she would learn the same lesson the rest of us did. No one is above the law, and no title, not even HOA president, can shield you from the truth forever. That night, as I turned off the porch light and looked over the calm, quiet street, I whispered to myself, peace at last. And this time, I knew it would last. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more real-life HOA dramas and powerful justice tales, make sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe to HOA Bright Reality, where every story reveals the truth behind the walls of power.